Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take the complex research and academic work you send us, and, well, we try to boil it down to the core insights for you.
And today's mission is, wow, it's a big one. Maybe the most fundamental challenge in how we think.
Yeah, we're going beyond just simple right or wrong. We're diving deep into the very foundations of ethical knowledge, exploring those hidden algorithms, you could say, and the really subjective filters that shape what we even call morality.
It's quite the intellectual journey we've mapped out. We start way up high with abstract metaphysics, the ancient search for where morality comes from.
Okay.
Then we bring it down to the computational side of making decisions. How do we actually figure out what to do?
Right.
And we'll end up looking at the really practical, detailed work needed just to understand each other and find some unity in a world that's just incredibly diverse.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. Maybe we can start with a classic moral scenario, just to get everyone thinking, set the stage.
Good idea.
Yeah.
The hook.
So imagine this, you, the listener, a burglar. He's planning a crime, sneaking up to an old woman's house. He smashes a window at the back, intending to steal things.
Okay, standard crime setup.
But here's the twist. Inside, the old woman is unconscious. There's a carbon monoxide leak, silent, deadly. By breaking that window, the burglar accidentally lets in fresh air, saves her life.
Wow. Okay. The classic moral paradox. Criminal intent, but a life-saving outcome.
Exactly. The intention. Purely selfish, destructive. The result, actually, altruistic in effect.
So the question is?
Yeah, did he do a good thing? I mean, if you just look at the outcome she lived, you'd have to say yes.
At one level, yes.
But does he still deserve blame for trying to commit a crime? Should he get a medal for saving her or jail time for breaking and entering?
And the moment you start weighing intention versus outcome.
That's it. You're already starting to show your hand, philosophically speaking, which meta-ethical view you lean towards. And that brings us perfectly into our first section.
Precisely. Because before we could even talk about rules for behavior, that's normative ethics.
Right.
Or how to apply those rules in specific situations, like in medicine or business, that's applied ethics.
Got it.
We have to start higher up with meta-ethics. This is really the philosophy of ethics itself. It asks the big questions. What is morality? Where does it come from? Is it even real or just opinion?
Is it objective or just preference?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this really splits into two main camps, doesn't it? Moral realism versus moral anti-realism.
That's the core conflict. Moral realism. Well, that often feels like common sense, doesn't it? It says moral facts are real. They exist out there in the world, objectively. Like, I don't know, the law of gravity.
So, like, torturing innocent people for fun is wrong. Isn't just my opinion, it's actually true.
According to a realist, yes. Unequivocally true. Doesn't matter what any person or culture thinks.
Yeah.
It just is wrong.
Okay. But then the other side, anti-realism.
Anti-realism says, no, moral statements don't point to objective facts. They're more like expressions of our feelings, our preferences, our attitudes. That's moral subjectivism.
Which, if true, means all morality is relative. And that feels, well, uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Deeply unsettling, yeah. But let's say we lean towards realism. We think, okay, moral facts are real. Then we immediately slam into the grounding problem.
Okay, what's that?
It's the question. If these moral facts are objective, solid, unchanging, what holds them up? Where do they come from? What's their ultimate foundation? It's this deep metaphysical dig for something solid to stand on.
And the technical side of this gets pretty fascinating, forcing us to think about how explanation even works. The sources talk about grounding.
Yes, grounding is a metaphysical relationship. Think of it like explanation or dependence. What makes something true? What does it rely on?
And usually it's assumed to be irreflexive. That sounds technical. Can you give us an analogy? What does irreflexive mean here?
Sure. Think of building blocks. Block A supports block B. Irreflexive means block B cannot also support block A.
Okay.
Or think of a family tree. Your parents ground your existence, in a way. You don't ground theirs. The arrow of dependence or explanation usually points one way.
It prevents loops. Circular reasoning. A has to come first to explain B.
That's the standard assumption, yes. It keeps things orderly.
But philosophy loves to throw a wrench in the works. So enter the self-grounding thesis.
Right. Some philosophers argue maybe a fact fifth can actually ground itself, at least partly.
Why would they want to say that? It sounds weird.
Well, often it's to avoid something called infinite regress. If every fact needs another fact to ground it, which needs another one, you end up needing an infinite chain of grounds stretched back forever.
Which seems problematic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So self-grounding is proposed as a way to stop the regress. Maybe some fundamental facts just hold themselves up. They challenge the idea that grounding has to be irreflexive.
Okay, I can see the motivation. But the sources push back hard on this using something called the explanatory challenge, specifically the informativeness constraint. This sounds like the crucial objection.
It's a powerful one. The informativeness constraint basically says for something to count as a real explanation, the explanation part, the explaining.
The cause or the ground.
Yes. It has to give you some information that wasn't already in the thing you're trying to explain the explanations.
Okay, makes sense. Like if I ask why my computer crashed and you say because it experienced a system failure.
You've learned nothing new. That explanation fails the test. It's uninformative. Tautological, really.
So applying that to self-grounding, if a fact F is supposed to ground itself.
Then the explanans and the explanandum are the exact same fact. S has mass m. You're supposed to explain S has mass m. It conveys zero new information. It fails the informativeness constraint.
It's just saying the same thing twice.
Precisely. It's very hard to see how self-grounding can do actual explanatory work. Now, contrast that with normal, irreflexive explanations. They often work because they use different guises, different ways of describing the same thing.
The guy's argument. Explain that.
Okay, take water. We can explain why water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. How? By using its chemical guise. H2O?
Right.
We explain the macroscopic property, boiling point, by appealing to the microscopic structure and behavior. H2O molecules, energy, bonds breaking. Water and H2O refer to the same stuff, but there are different descriptions or guises.
And using the different guise provides new information.
Exactly. It connects the phenomenon to a deeper level of structure. That's where the explanatory power comes from. The challenge for self-grounding is that it seems to use the same fact in the same guise on both sides of the equation. No new information, no real explanation.
So the search for that absolute objective moral foundation runs into these really deep logical and linguistic knots pretty quickly.
It really does. It shows the limits of our tools for thinking about foundations.
Okay, so wrestling with the metaphysical grounding problem is clearly a heavy lift, maybe impossible to fully solve.
It's that way sometimes.
But, life goes on. You, the listener, us, we have to make moral choices every day. We have to act.
We do.
So this pulls us out of that really abstract meta-ethics and into normative ethics. And the sources suggest reframing this whole thing, thinking about ethics as a computational challenge.
That's a really useful shift in perspective, I think. If the whole point of ethics is to figure out what to do to arrive at some conduct, some solution or output, then ethics is essentially the system or algorithm we run to compute that answer.
And the difference between moral problems isn't necessarily about good versus evil, but about complexity.
Exactly. Purely a matter of informational complexity. How much data do you need? How many variables? How complex is the calculation?
Okay, so we can divide ethical problems by scale. On one end, you have low complexity ethics, the arithmetic problem.
Yeah, the 2 + 2 = 4 of morality. Should I steal this pen? Should I punch this person for no reason?
The algorithm is pretty simple. If action is steal, then conduct is don't do it.
Right. Few variables, clear pre-computed rules, trivial information needed, easy calculation.
But then you get high complexity ethics,
Yeah.
the engineering problems.
Whoa, yeah. These are the massive dilemmas. Thousands of variables, conflicting duties, uncertain outcomes, huge consequences.
Like the CEO example you mentioned earlier, lay off 10,000 people to save 50,000 jobs and the whole company from bankruptcy. Or gamble everything on a risky turnaround plan.
That's a skyscraper problem. You've got duties to shareholders, duties to employees, both those laid off and those remaining, legal constraints, market predictions, probabilities. It's immense.
There's no simple if-then rule that covers it. The algorithm needed is just enormous, maybe too big for a human brain to run perfectly.
That's the core issue. And this is where the big ethical theories is the utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics come in. They're essentially attempts to solve a meta problem.
Which is?
Can we find a simpler, more elegant algorithm? A kind of intellectual compression technique that works for both the easy arithmetic problems and the complex skyscraper ones.
Right. Trying to find one rule to rule them all, basically.
Sort of, yeah. Take utilitarianism. Its compression strategy is that famous master rule. Maximize the greatest good for the greatest number.
Simple in principle.
Elegant? Yes. And in theory, it's great for those complex skyscraper problems. You just feed in all the variables, calculate which option produces the most overall happiness or well-being, and boom, that's your ethical duty.
Okay, but the critique usually is, can anyone actually do that calculation in real time?
That's part of it, the sheer speed. But it's deeper than just speed. It's the computational cost and the information gathering. Philosophers call it the framing problem.
Meaning?
How do you even know which variables to include in your calculation and which ones to leave out? Does the CEO need to factor in the precise emotional impact on all 10,000 families, the ripple effects on their local communities years down the line, the potential impact on grandchildren's health?
The scope just explodes.
It becomes infinite, potentially. You can't possibly gather all the relevant data, let alone process it and weigh all the potential future consequences accurately. So perfect utilitarianism, while maybe a sound principle in the abstract, is computationally impossible for actual humans making decisions under pressure.
Okay, so it's an ideal that hits the wall of human limits. What about the other big one, deontology? Kant and his rules.
Deontology takes the opposite approach to compression. It focuses on unbreakable, fundamental rules or duties, like Kant's categorical imperative, often simplified as act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law.
Or simpler still, rules like lying is always wrong.
Exactly. Very clear rules. It works brilliantly for the simple arithmetic cases. Should I lie? Rule says no, done. Minimal information, easy computation.
But the classic failure point is...
Those high complexity dilemmas where duties clash. The famous example, the Nazi at the door asking if you're hiding a Jewish family.
Right.
If your absolute rule is never lie, you have to tell the truth, leading to murder. Deontology struggles immensely when unbreakable rules collide, or when following a rule leads to clearly disastrous consequences. It's too rigid for the skyscraper problems.
And we shouldn't forget the third major approach, which shifts the focus entirely.
Right, virtue ethics. This approach compresses the problem differently. It doesn't focus on outcomes like utilitarianism or rigid rules like deontology. It focuses on the person acting.
The character of the moral agent.
Exactly. The ethical answer is found by asking, what would the virtuous person do in this situation? The goal isn't to run an external calculation, but to cultivate an internal state, good moral habits, wisdom, good character.
And this is a really old, broad tradition, right?
Aristotle's Phronimos, the person of practical wisdom, is key here. But also Stoicism, like Marcus Aurelius, focusing on inner discipline and duty. And you see similar threads in Buddhist ethics, focusing on compassion and mindfulness, or Confucianism, emphasizing harmony and fulfilling social roles virtuously.
So different ways to try and simplify the how to live question. But even with these systems, different people and different cultures clearly end up with different moral beliefs, which brings us back to relativism.
Yes, but we need that crucial distinction the sources made. Descriptive cultural relativism. This is just stating the obvious. Different cultures do have different moral beliefs and practices. Look at views on marriage, or punishment, or food taboos across the globe. It's an empirical fact. Sociological observation.
Undeniable. But the philosophical trap is normative cultural relativism.
Yes. This is the much stronger and much more problematic claim that the moral facts themselves actually change depending on the culture. That morality is just whatever a culture says it is.
And the problem there is...
Well, if that's true, then you lose any basis for criticizing any culture's practices, no matter how horrific. Nazi Germany was right for its time and place, by that logic.
Yikes.
And the whole idea of moral progress becomes meaningless. If morality is just relative to the current culture, how can we say we've improved from, say, the days of widespread slavery?
You can't. It collapses the whole idea of better or worse.
Exactly. Which is why most moral philosophers reject normative relativism, even while fully acknowledging descriptive relativism.
Okay, so summing up this section, we have the deep philosophy of metaethics, then the systems or algorithms of normative ethics, utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, and also applied ethics, which is taking those systems and using them in specific fields like bioethics, business ethics, legal ethics.
Right, applying the algorithms to real-world domains.
But if these grand systems have computational flaws, or they rest on shaky metaphysical ground, or they lead to relativism, how does society actually achieve any kind of moral agreement or cohesion? Where does unity come from?
That's the perfect transition. If the top-down, abstract, rule-based systems have these limitations, especially in really complex situations, we need to look elsewhere for how societies actually hang together morally. We need to look at social dynamics.
And traditionally, some influential theories, like those based on René Girard's work, painted a pretty grim picture here, didn't they?
They did. Girard focused heavily on mimesis, the idea that we imitate each other's desires. I want what you want because you want it.
Which sounds like a recipe for conflict.
Girard argued it inevitably leads to rivalry, envy, and eventually violence. And in his view, the way societies often restore order from this mimetic chaos is through scapegoating.
finding someone or some group to blame and collectively punish or expel, creating unity through shared opposition.
Exactly. A dark view of social cohesion, essentially built on exclusion and sacrifice.
But the sources say contemporary research is pushing back against this inevitability.
Strongly. Mimesis imitation is absolutely fundamental to being human. It's how we learn language, skills, social norms. It's biologically wired. We even have mirror neurons in our brains that fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else perform it.
So imitation is deep, but it doesn't have to be negative.
Precisely. It can be channeled constructively.
Mhm.
Researchers talk about creative mimesis, learning from role models, collaborating, positive inspiration, or mimetic agonism. Think of friendly competition, like in sports or intellectual debate, where rivalry is channeled constructively within agreed-upon rules.
So mimesis isn't inherently violent. It depends on how it's managed.
Yes, through institutional design, social norms, rhetorical strategies. And importantly, mimesis isn't just external. We imitate internally, too, in our imagination, in dreams. We can work through desires and rivalries without always needing an external person or scapegoat. Unity doesn't require exclusion.
This idea of constructive, non-exclusionary unity points towards an alternative foundation, doesn't it? Back towards moral universalism or objectivism.
It does. The idea that there might be a core set of ethical principles or behaviors that apply universally to everyone in similar situations, regardless of their specific culture or background.
And crucially, there's empirical evidence for this now, not just philosophical argument. That 2019 study.
Yes, a landmark study. Researchers looked at ethnographic data from 60 diverse societies all around the world, and they found 7 core moral behaviors that were valued positively in virtually all of them, like 99.9% of the time.
That's incredible consistency. What were those 7?
Okay, they were 1, helping your family, your kin; 2, helping your group, loyalty; 3, reciprocating, returning favors, fairness; 4, being brave, courageous;
Okay.
5, respecting superiors or authority, deference; 6, dividing resources fairly, justice; and 7, respecting others' property.
Interesting. These aren't abstract theological rules. They sound like, well, like the basic requirements for any cooperative society to function.
Exactly. They're practical behavioral imperatives for cooperation, trust, and survival. And the fact they appear almost universally suggests a potential common ground for morality that isn't based on scapegoating or cultural relativism.
A foundation for unity built on cooperation itself. And the sources provide a really powerful real-world example of putting this kind of constructive, non-violent unity into practice on a massive scale.
Yeah.
The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC.
The TRC is a crucial case study. After apartheid, they faced unimaginable trauma and division. But they chose a path based not on retribution, but on restorative justice, heavily influenced by indigenous African philosophy, particularly Ubuntu.
Ubuntu. I've heard that phrase. It means...
The core idea, often translated as, "I am because we are." It emphasizes interconnectedness, community, the idea that your humanity is bound up with everyone else's. My well-being depends on your well-being.
a deeply relational view of personhood.
Very much so. And this philosophy underpinned the TRC's process, moving away from purely punitive justice.
So what did that look like in practice? How did they handle the horrific crimes committed under apartheid?
It was a structured, often public process. It involved 5 key stages, generally speaking. First, perpetrators had to fully acknowledge their actions. Second, they had to show genuine remorse. Third, they had to ask for forgiveness from the victims or their families. Fourth, the victims had the space to potentially grant forgiveness. And fifth, there was an element of reparations, symbolic or material, aimed at restoring dignity and rebuilding.
Wow. That's incredibly demanding emotionally for everyone involved.
Immensely. But the point is, it demonstrated that even after extreme violence and systemic injustice, social healing and a form of unity could be pursued through restoration rather than just punishment. It proved nonviolent. Relational solutions are possible, replacing the need for vengeance with a commitment to collective understanding and rebuilding.
That's applying relational ethics on a national scale, building consensus through empathy, dialogue, and care, not just rules or force.
And interestingly, this idea of building consensus through rational, non-coercive means also finds echoes in formal logic and computer science. The sources mention things like AGM-inspired logical systems.
Okay, that sounds technical again. Break that down for us. Minimal mutilation principles.
Right. Okay, imagine 2 people have different sets of beliefs, maybe strongly held beliefs, but they conflict on some points. Now, new, undeniable evidence comes along that challenges both of them. An AGM-type logic. using a minimal mutilation principle, suggests the most rational way for them to update their beliefs is to make the smallest possible changes to their original belief systems to accommodate the new evidence, while preserving as much of their old beliefs as possible.
So don't throw everything out, just tweak what you absolutely have to stay consistent with the new facts and with each other.
Exactly. It's about minimizing disruption, preserving coherence, finding common ground through rational adjustment, and building degrees of trust and harmony. It's a formal way of modeling consensus building that doesn't rely on forcing agreement or excluding dissenting views, but rather on careful, rational updating.
And the language we use in these processes is critical too. The sources noted that unifying rhetoric often combines specific themes.
Yes, empirically effective unifying language tends to blend appeals to both care, compassion, well-being, and fairness, justice, rights, reciprocity, those universal values we saw in the cross-cultural study.
Care and fairness.
And crucially, it combines those themes with collective pronouns. We, our, us.
Why is that combination important?
Because it activates those shared moral foundations, care, fairness, while simultaneously building a sense of shared identity and purpose, we. It fosters solidarity without needing to create an us versus them dynamic, without defining an outgroup to rally against. It's the linguistic architecture of constructive unity.
Okay, so we've seen that abstract algorithms might stumble, but unity built on universal cooperative principles, positive relationships, restorative justice like Ubuntu, it is possible.
Theoretically and practically, yes.
But now we hit what feels like the biggest hurdle in our current moment. The subjective filter, the way our own minds distort the reality we perceive, making it hard to even agree on basic facts, let alone complex moral truths.
This is where the crisis of consensus really bites, and it connects to deeper philosophical critiques, like those from post-structuralism.
Okay, what's the key idea there?
Post-structuralist thinkers basically question the stability and objectivity of the systems we use to interpret the world language, knowledge systems, cultural codes. They argue that these structures aren't neutral windows onto reality. They're shaped by history, culture, power dynamics.
So they're inherently biased.
In a sense, yes. They argue there's no unbiased view from nowhere, no pure meta-language that stands above all other discourses and can describe truth perfectly and objectively. All our tools for understanding are conditioned, situated.
And when this deep skepticism about objective structures filters down into public life, you get phenomena like post-truth.
Exactly. We all know the common definition. Situations where objective facts matter less in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief.
Facts become secondary to feelings or tribal affiliation.
Right. But the sources emphasize an important point. Post-truth isn't just an academic debate about the philosophical nature of truth itself. It's more of a sociological crisis. It's about the breakdown of trust in the institutions we traditionally relied on to establish facts, science, journalism, government experts.
And that breakdown is accelerated
By the current media environment, definitely. Social media algorithms often prioritize engagement, which means prioritizing emotional, polarizing content over careful factual analysis. The infrastructure itself can undermine shared reality.
It's interesting, though, that the sources bring up Hannah Arendt's concept of defactualization from decades ago.
Yes, her analysis of the inability to distinguish fact from fiction is eerily relevant. But her diagnosis was different from today's common view.
How so?
Writing about the Vietnam War era, she didn't primarily blame emotion. She actually pointed the finger at the hyper-rational, technocratic problem solvers in government.
The number crunchers.
Yeah. She argued that their tendency to translate messy, concrete facts into abstract, pseudo-mathematical models and cost-benefit analyses actually blurred the line between reality and fantasy. It made horrific realities seem like manageable equations.
That's a fascinating counterintuitive take. Hyper-rationality leading to a loss of fact, not just emotion.
It's a really provocative contrast to the current narrative. But whether the driver is runaway emotion or detached hyper-rationality, the result is a weakening of our collective grip on shared facts.
And this vulnerability to distortion isn't just theoretical. There's compelling empirical evidence from sociolinguistics about how our minds actively filter reality, especially when perceiving outsiders. The research on folk linguistic artifacts.
Yes, this is where the subjective filter becomes really concrete and measurable. It's quite a striking set of experiments.
Okay, walk us through it. It involved people imitating accents.
That's right. American English speakers were asked to imitate non-native accents of English.
Yeah.
They did two kinds of imitations.
Two.
First, free imitations. This was purely spontaneous.
Yeah.
They just produced what they thought that accent sounded like based entirely on their internal stereotype, their folk artifact. No external input, just the stereotype in their head.
Okay, pure mental image.
Second, modeled imitations. Here they first listened to a short clip of an actual, authentic, non-native speaker. Then they imitated that specific speaker, so they had immediate, real, phonetic data to work with.
So free is pure stereotype, modeled has a reality check built in.
Exactly. Now, the first surprising finding came from analyzing the sounds themselves. Phonetically, both the free and the modeled imitations were clearly accented, different from the speaker's normal voice. But
Not.
there was no consistent, significant phonetic difference between the free, stereotype-based imitations and the modeled, reality-informed imitations.
Wait, what? Even when they just heard the real accent, they still basically produce their internal stereotype.
Largely, yes. The power of the pre-existing folk artifact, the stereotype, was so strong that it seemed to override or heavily filter the actual phonetic details they just heard. The internal mental image dominated the external reality even seconds later.
That's already pretty damning about subjective filters. But it gets worse with the listeners.
Oh, yeah. Then they had other people listen to these recordings, both the free and the modeled imitations, and ask them to identify the accent being imitated.
And the result.
The listeners were statistically better at correctly identifying the accents in the free imitations, the pure stereotypes, than they were for the modeled imitations.
They recognize the stereotype more easily than the imitation based on reality. Why on earth?
Because the stereotype, the folk artifact, is cognitively simpler. It fits neatly into the listener's own pre-existing mental box for that group or accent. It's easy to categorize. The modeled imitations, because they contain traces of actual individual variation, the messy complexity of a real person's speech didn't fit the stereotype quite as perfectly. They were slightly harder to process, less instantly recognizable as the expected stereotype.
So listeners actually prefer the simplified stereotype because it matches their internal filter, even if it's less accurate.
That's the implication. For perceiving out groups, at least, the internal artifact acts as a powerful cognitive filter. We seem to default to the easy stereotype, filtering out individual nuances. This subjective preference for the artifact poses a huge challenge to achieving genuine understanding and universal moral consensus. We're fighting our own cognitive shortcuts.
Wow, okay, that finding really underscores the challenge. If our brains are seemingly wired to prefer stereotypes over nuanced reality, especially for people outside our immediate group, how do we even begin to do the constructive, universalist work we talked about? How do we bridge these gaps across genuinely diverse groups, especially linguistic ones?
It means the focus has to shift radically, away from searching for the perfect abstract rule and toward the hard, practical, detailed work of relational work. And first, we have to appreciate the sheer scale of the diversity and the information gap.
You mean linguistic diversity?
Yes. Think about it. There are over 7,000 languages spoken in the world. Maybe 7,164 according to recent counts.
Okay.
How many have a Wikipedia? Only about 350.
That's tiny.
It's a massive gap. Text-based knowledge systems, like Wikipedia or even academic publishing, inherently fail to capture the richness and nuance of the vast majority of human languages, most of which are primarily oral. This lack of representation feeds directly into the out-group perception problem, making it easier for stereotypes, those folk artifacts, to dominate.
So bridging this requires a different kind of effort, and the sources point to projects like the OpenSpeaks archives as a model.
Exactly. OpenSpeaks focuses specifically on creating digital multimedia archives for lesser-resourced languages, languages like Kusunda or Banda in South Asia, or Hove and Gujari languages, often overlooked by mainstream documentation efforts.
And what makes their approach an example of this relational work? It's not just recording stuff, right?
Not at all. It's about the how. It embodies an ethos of meticulous care, designed specifically to overcome subjective filters and promote genuine understanding.
How so? What do they do differently?
Well, first, they focus on recording natural descriptive speech in context, not just sterile word lists or responses to interviewer questions. They try to capture the language as it's really used.
Okay.
They ensure high technical quality, clear audio, no distracting background noise. Basic, but crucial.
But the core relational work seems to be in the processing and presentation.
Absolutely. This is key. Every recording needs to be carefully subtitled, transcribed, and translated, and not just into English, but also into the relevant local official language, making it accessible within its own regional context.
Right.
And critically, they emphasize using closed captions, not subtitles that are permanently burned into the video image.
Why does that specific detail matter so much?
Because closed captions are vastly more accessible. Users can turn them on or off, change the font size, or potentially even feed them into other translation tools. It helps non-native speakers, language learners, people with hearing impairments, people with reading difficulties. It maximizes the potential for comprehension across different needs and subjective starting points.
It's designing for maximum understanding.
Precisely. And the whole process involves multiple checks back with native speakers and language experts to ensure accuracy. It's painstaking. It requires building trust and relationships with the language communities. It's a high degree of relational care aimed directly at bridging those interpretation gaps that the folk artifacts create.
It sounds like the practical application of the same principles we saw in Ubuntu, achieving understanding and connection not through some grand theory, but through careful, respectful, detailed interaction.
It is exactly that spirit. And you can see parallels in other fields that grapple with subjectivity and care, like healthcare ethics.
How does this connect to healthcare?
Well, there's been a significant movement in medical ethics, often associated with feminist ethics, known as the ethics of care. It critiques an over-reliance on purely abstract, masculine-coded principles like autonomy or justice viewed in isolation.
Okay.
Instead, it emphasizes feminine-coded virtues like receptivity, empathy, interdependence, and attending to the specific context and vulnerability of the patient. It's about seeing the patient not just as a case to apply rules to, but as a person in a web of relationships with specific needs and vulnerabilities that require a caring response.
So less focus on abstract rights, more on concrete needs and relationships.
Yes, prioritizing the relational context. The Open Speaks project embodies this.
Yeah.
It's receptive to the vulnerability of these languages and their speakers, and it shows care by investing the meticulous effort needed to make their voices genuinely accessible and understandable across subjective divides. It's practical care ethics applied to linguistic documentation.
So it's fascinating. We started way up in the clouds of meta-ethics, asking if moral truth can ground itself.
Debating irreflexivity and the logic of explanation.
And we've ended up down here in the incredibly detailed practical work of checking transcriptions and choosing closed captions over burned-in subtitles.
It seems the key to fostering global moral understanding might not lie in finding the perfect logical foundation or the ultimate ethical algorithm,
but in the persistent, careful, relational work required to accurately represent and respectfully engage with the profound diversity of human experience and language. That meticulous effort reflects the same spirit of care and fairness needed for restorative justice like the TRC. #tag outro.
What a journey today. We really covered a vast intellectual landscape. From that fundamental crisis in meta-ethics, can morality be objective? Where does it come from? Wrestling with grounding and irreflexivity.
Yeah, running into the limits of logic pretty fast there. Then shifting to ethics as computation, seeing how even the best algorithms, utilitarianism, deontology struggle with complexity and human limitations.
And then we explored how societies actually build unity, moving beyond the pessimistic view of mimetic rivalry and scapegoating.
Towards those empirically backed universal moral behaviors and powerful examples of constructive unity like Ubuntu and the TRC's restorative justice model.
But then, the final challenge. That stubborn subjective filter, the post-truth problem, the breakdown of shared facts.
And that stark linguistic research showing how easily our minds default to stereotypes, the folk artifacts, even preferring them over nuanced reality because they're just easier.
So, the big takeaway seems to be this. Perhaps the ultimate task of human morality isn't cracking the code of the perfect abstract system.
Or solving the puzzle of self-grounding.
Right. Maybe it's about managing the inescapable reality of our subjective filters and navigating radical pluralism through concrete, sustained relational work.
Whether that's the meticulous documentation and translation of OpenSpeaks, ensuring voices are heard accurately.
Or the painstaking process of restorative justice, rebuilding trust and community piece by piece. It's about the commitment to mutual comprehension and collective care.
So, if that research is right, if our default is often to prefer the easy stereotype, the free imitation, over the more complex reality, the modeled imitation.
Because the simple artifact fits our internal narrative more comfortably.
Then here's the thought to leave you with. What specific conscious relational effort can you make today or this week to actively notice and try to override your own subjective folk artifacts? What work can you do to really listen for the specific individual details of the person, the idea, the culture right in front of you, rather than just slotting it into a pre existing mental category?
That conscious effort, that's where the real ethical work might lie. Something to think about.